Hello, I'm Lauren Robel, Executive Vice President of Indiana University and Provost of our Bloomington campus. Congratulations to the Institute for International Business on its 10th anniversary. Indiana University is committed to global partnerships, and we believe in the power of global engagement to further public diplomacy. Therefore, I'm delighted to join you for this kickoff of the Kelley Worldwide Roundtable, a series that will serve as a model for productive global dialogue on some of the most pressing issues facing us today. This year's topic reaffirms the importance of global connectedness during periods of disruption and reflects the critical and ongoing need for thoughtful and cooperative cross-cultural exchange. In our highly connected world, businesses, systems, products, processes, and ideas know no borders. In a global crisis, our border-spanning partnerships are key to stability and continued progress. The pandemic we face is a testament to how interconnected we all are. We don't have to look much further than our own campus to witness how networks of support, communication, and encouragement stabilize both individuals and larger groups. In times of disruption, when plans and projects and lives are taken off course, these networks provide a framework on which to lean and ideas on which to draw. The pressures we face due to the pandemic are so extraordinary that we have to place a sharp focus on solving them together. I commend the Institute for International Business for leading the Kelley Worldwide Roundtable. At IU Bloomington, we remain committed to graduating students who are citizens of the world and who know the importance of connecting with one another through important conversations precisely like this one. Students from every inhabited continent travel to our campus to study, while thousands of our own students study abroad in a vast range of programs and across disciplines. We teach some 80 languages, more than any other university in the United States, and we organize regular events and showcases for our students the arts, ideas, and foods and traditions of cultures across the world. In immersing our students in diverse intellectual and cultural life, our goal is to graduate students who continue to learn across cultures and who celebrate difference and are informed by it. The Kelley School of Business shines bright in international education and actively reimagines how global business operates at its most optimal level. The Institute for International Business has connected Kelley's phenomenal creativity, energy, and people with the larger world. In true Kelley fashion, through the Kelley Worldwide Roundtable, it is forging a better pathway for us now. I want to congratulate the Institute on behalf of our entire campus on their 10th anniversary. Thank you.
It's a great pleasure to join you today, virtually, to welcome you to this roundtable event. Its goal is to explore the importance of global connectedness during this period of such intense disruption of our society and our economy. The pandemic has reinforced something we already know, which is that addressing the most challenging issues of our time requires collaboration across countries and cultures, and requires the kind of innovation and creativity that are often sparked by bringing together multiple sources of expertise and multiple perspectives. For businesses worldwide, as for universities worldwide, it is critical at this moment to expand the channels of communication and engagement that promote the open exchange of ideas across borders. In that connection, I'm delighted that IU's Global Gateway offices have been able to play a role in supporting this event. The Gateway Network was designed to give IU a permanent presence in other regions of the world, bringing us closer to our academic partners, industry partners, and alumni to facilitate exactly this kind of durable cross-border engagement. The network was established just 6 years ago and now has offices in Bangkok, Beijing, Berlin, Mexico City, and New Delhi. And I'd like to thank the office directors who worked on this event. Today is also, of course, a celebration of global connectedness on the occasion of the Institute for International Business's 10th anniversary. In the same way that the Global Gateway offices connect IU with the world, the IIB connects the Kelley School of Business with the world through work to solve development challenges in emerging markets, always working in collaboration with local partners, through training programs in entrepreneurship and skills that build the capacity of individuals, businesses, and communities in developing countries, and through its educational programs here in the United States that provide international and intercultural learning opportunities to students in high school and beyond. The Institute's work models the kind of mutual engagement that will help us confront and address change at the scale that we're experiencing today. So, congratulations to the Institute for International Business, to Dean Heidi Kestner, to Executive Director LaVon Schlegel and her team on this 10th anniversary. And thanks to all of you for coming together today to think about where we are and how we move forward together.
Hello from Bloomington. I'm Heidi Kestner, Dean of the Kelley School of Business. Thank you for participating in this important roundtable discussion and for helping us celebrate 10 years of the Institute for International Business, or as we refer to it, IIB. The IIB has a special significance to me, not just because I'm the Dean of Kelley, but I helped create the Institute 10 years ago. Our goal was to transform lives, organizations, and communities by nurturing partnerships and dreams, by building entrepreneurial knowledge in communities, and by creating momentum in emerging and developing markets. It's been wonderful to watch the IIB establish, foster, and grow new relationships and enterprises, particularly among women and young people, and in the areas where hope and progress are needed most. Through the years, we've watched Kelley's footprint expand around the globe. As examples, in Myanmar, our ADEPT program created training centers and strengthened faculty and curricula at Yangon University of Economics. In Bethlehem, we helped launch 13 startup companies and train more than 1,600 people in our business incubator. In Barbados, a partnership with the Cave Hill School of Business helped provide critical training to combat growing social and economic issues. I may be most proud of our Global Business Institute, or GBI. Through GBI, the partnership with Coca-Cola Company, we inspired nearly 600 young people in the Middle East and North Africa. These students hungered to know more about business and entrepreneurship, and they showed a willingness to push themselves and others towards something better. You can actually see the transformation in these students during their time in Bloomington and other locations in the U.S. They realized their dreams and ideas could be developed into viable businesses and projects that could lead to real change in their communities back home. The results? More than 160 small businesses were created that employed nearly 800 people. More than 160 participants in the program went on to earn scholarships for further study. And 95% of the students were employed within 3 months of graduating from college. Those are the statistics, but the real impact is immeasurable. IIB is also home to the Center for International Business Education and Research, or CYBER, which helps businesses in the U.S. compete successfully in the global marketplace. We're one of 15 national centers that are funded by the U.S. Department of Education. We manage funds for faculty development, internships, improving language skills, mentoring, and experiential learning. Over these 10 years, we've made many connections. But the word connections doesn't convey the fact that what we've really done is establish friendships. We built bridges between countries, fostered understanding, and created trusting, long-lasting relationships. We built empathy. One young participant in GBI said, "You don't just learn about business, you learn about people." While I had a hand in creating the IIB, there's no disputing that LaVon Schlegel is the heart and soul of the Institute. I can't imagine anyone else working as tirelessly and with as much determination and purpose as she has over the last 10 years. Her commitment to bring people together and transform lives, that continues to be realized. Even so, the pandemic means we must become more nimble and innovative in our efforts. Of course, LaVon has had a lot of enthusiastic help over the years. In the early days of IIB, Sean Connor and Fred Perry played key roles. And while they moved on to other important things at the university and in the world, we're grateful for those early efforts. And then we have our current staff, some of whom have been here since the beginning. Christine Everett, Suzanne Lodato, Jeff Poland, Tim Smith, Trina Chandler, Ryan Craven, and Amanda Wood. To all of you, please accept my sincere gratitude. Your dedication is inspiring, and I like to think we've helped create a more connected world with your bigger and bolder ideas. To all of you joining in, thank you for being with us for this event. We're honored you've chosen to spend time with us. I'm very proud of IIB's diligent work and accomplishments. But there's still more work to be done. So this is a working celebration. I urge you to keep the conversation going long after the discussion and celebration ends. Get involved. Help us write more chapters for this ongoing global story. Help us continue to create momentum around the world and right here at Indiana University through our international efforts. Thank you and enjoy the program.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Indiana University Kelley School of Business's Worldwide Roundtable. My name is LaVon Schlegel and I am the Executive Director of the Institute for International Business, or as Heidi said more casually, IIB. It is my honor to follow such distinguished speakers as Provost Lauren Rebel, Vice President Hannah Buxbaum, and our own Dean Kesner on this most auspicious day, and I thank them for such a great beginning to our inaugural event in the celebration of IIB's 10th anniversary. And thank you all for joining us this afternoon as we begin the last of our 4 global panels, all taking place today to discuss the importance of global connectedness during disruption and beyond. You are among the almost 600 registrants to these 4 events. As you can imagine, it took a global team to put it all together. I would like to thank Jen Goins and Allison DeWitt from the Kelley School Alumni Association, Roy Hooper from the IU Alumni Association, Ali Batten, the director of the IU Global Gateways, Rob Clendening and Rebecca Salerno, Kelley Marketing, the Provost Office, the Office of the Vice President for International Affairs, Zach Watt and Brian Boucher from the Kelley Learning Media team. And finally, I would like to thank Tim Smith from IIB, because without him, this project would not have happened. During the past decade, IIB has been in the world working to bring people together with new thoughts, new ideas and skills, new relationships, always in hope of creating momentum for change. Reflecting back on these years, I find myself especially grateful that I was able to attend IU as a grad student in the very early 1980s, for it was during this time that I had the great privilege of knowing Chancellor Herman B. Wells through the work that I did with a student organization. Being a farm kid from Indiana, I knew Indiana, but the Chancellor encouraged me to go beyond what I knew, beyond my comfort zone, to experience the world for all of its possibilities and challenges. His words have encouraged me throughout my career, bringing me to today, to this event. And I know that Chancellor Wells would have been proud of what we've accomplished, but he would have asked me in the very next breath, so what's next? What's next in our work on the global stage? What's next in creating and maintaining the global relationships that have moved business and education forward with such velocity in the past 20 years? What's next for making sure that we all have a chance to learn and grow from our relationships with partners and friends around the world to create something better than what we have? And along with the what's next, we also must look at the how. How do we do it together? because it is this sharing between nations, between businesses, and between people where the best ideas and the best solutions are born. So it's no small task that we have asked you all to participate in today. Our moderator and panel will tackle some of these questions head on, sharing their ideas and experiences and hopes. In the breakout sessions, we look to all of you here today to share your ideas and actions for keeping your global network active and engaged during this period of disruption. Now, I am doubly pleased to introduce today's moderator, Heidi Kestner. Dean Kestner was appointed the Dean of the Kelley School of Business at Indiana University in July 2013. She also holds the Frank P. Popoff Chair of Strategic Management within the Management and Entrepreneurship Department. Since joining the Kelley School faculty in 1995, she has served in many leadership roles, including Associate Dean of Faculty and Research, Chair of the MBA program, and Chair of the Department of Management and Entrepreneurship. And recently, she was named the Business School Dean of the Year by Poets and Quants, a leading business school media outlet. Dean Kestner's research focuses on corporate boards, executive succession, mergers and acquisitions. In addition to teaching more than 100 executive education classes, she has consulted with many national and international firms on management and board-related issues. She currently serves on 5 boards. Dean Kestner earned her MBA and PhD from the Kelley School and her bachelor's degree in business administration from Southern Methodist University. Please join me in welcoming Dean Heidi Kestner as moderator for today's session.
Thanks, LaVon. I am so happy to be, so excited to be part of this event, as I noted in my video. And I'm very excited to be serving as moderator for this amazingly accomplished panel of speakers. I'm going to introduce all 3. I'm going to ask them to turn on their cameras so that you can see them as I introduce them, and then we'll go straight to the questions. So first off, I'm going to introduce Carolyn Valentine. Carolyn is a global strategy and marketing executive with 20 years of marketing and general management experience across healthcare and consumer industries. She's the vice president and general manager for Philips, Sonic, and Bernafon brands, and with Daymont, a global leader of medical devices in the hearing healthcare space. Prior to this role, she was VP Enterprise Customers in the Medical Devices Organization with Johnson & Johnson. And prior to joining J&J, Carolyn was Area Senior Director for Commercial and Business Development for Europe, Middle East, Africa, and Pakistan within the International Nutrition Division of Abbott Laboratories. Carolyn is a member of the Dean's Council for the Kelley School of Business, and she is also the co-chair of the Global Group for the National Biotechnology and Pharmaceutical Association and a German Marshall Fellow. Carolyn earned her BA in French Studies and Communications with the University of Cincinnati and an MBA in Marketing, General Management, and International Business from the Kelley School. Next is Derek Hicks. Derek is currently Senior Vice President and Head of Business Development at Spark Therapeutics, a subsidiary of Roche. In this role, Derek is responsible for setting Spark's strategy for potential acquisitions, search and evaluation activities, licenses, and other partnership arrangements in collaboration with other key leaders. Derek also provides strategic input to the company's pipeline and business development activities. Prior to joining Spark, Derek was VP of Corporate Development at Pfizer, where he was responsible for leading high-profile transactions for the organization, including large-scale divestitures, acquisitions, licenses, and other partnership arrangements. Derek has demonstrated his leadership across a wide range of transactions, including the Zoetis separation and IPO, the externalization of Pfizer's neuroscience portfolio, the creation of Cerevel, an independent biotech co-owned by Pfizer and Bain Capital, and the execution of an exclusive licensing agreement with Axia for their novel therapy in the treatment of cardiovascular disease. Derek's accomplishments provide evidence of his broad and deep biopharmaceutical and transaction experience. Derek holds an undergraduate degree from the University of Connecticut, and he has an MBA from the Kelley School. and Thomas Reichert. Tom is currently BCG's Chair of Global Practices and Global Leader of Digital BCG. He's based in New York, having previously been part of BCG's teams in Munich and in Sydney. In his role as Chair of Practices, Tom leads the teams driving BCG's development and deployment of innovative client offers, as well as sector and function-specific intellectual property and new capabilities. He also oversees BCG's large-scale change initiatives, including transformation, enablement, and PMI. As global lead of digital BCG, he's particularly focused in leading the articulation, activation, enablement, and rapid deployment of wide-reaching digital BCG programs and capabilities. Prior to his current role, Tom served as chair of North America from 2013 to 2017. And in that role, Tom oversaw 19 offices in the United States, Canada, and Mexico. He launched a number of new initiatives aimed at accelerating growth, broadening expertise, and taking client service to the next level. In addition, Tom has worked extensively in Europe, Australia, and Asia, helping clients transform their businesses and their IT functions. Before joining BCG, Tom worked as acting CIO at BT Financial Australia, New Zealand, and was a relationship manager for small to medium-sized companies for Dresdner Bank AG in Germany. He earned an MBA from Indiana University and a PhD in economics from the University of Bayreuth, Germany. So Tom, since I just introduced you, why don't we start with you on our very first question? And it's a simple one to ask, perhaps a little bit more complex to answer. How has the pandemic changed the way you do business?
Heidi, thank you. And it's good to be with all of you. And thanks for hosting this. And it's always great to get together with the IU community in the different forms. So a real pleasure to be with all of you today. So our business is a consulting business. And the heart of it is to get our teams to our clients wherever they are, be on planes, be in hotels, be on trains, be in cars, and meet our clients and work shoulder to shoulder with them every day. That, as you can well imagine, it has changed very rapidly. We have no teams at our client sites these days. Well, in some parts of the world, it's starting to open up again. But our job was, in a very short period of time, to get everybody away from wherever they were and get them back home, which was a non-trivial activity because we've got our teams distributed all over the world. And so we were moving from, we've got to close down everything in China, everything in Asia, to Europe, to the US. And every time we thought it might not actually move all the way, and of course it did, as we know now in hindsight, getting our people back, with different visa setups, etc., to the locations where their loved ones, their families were, was not also straightforward. So that has changed substantially. But we now perform all of our business on virtual platforms, Zooms and WebExes and so on. And I'm surprised how well it works. Our question, and we'll talk more about that, will probably be more when we go into a hybrid world, what will that now exactly look like? But right now it's a primary remote world. It has changed fundamentally. And in some way, it's also become more productive because we can engage with many more people. I personally, my role is on a plane all across the globe, pre-pandemic. I can meet so many more clients and so many more teams over Zoom, but the touch is different. And that is the very important part also of our conversation of connectedness. Meeting people is easy. Connecting on a more meaningful level is sometimes, but not always so easy.
That's a really good point. We found that some of our connections, even with our students, are easier through Zoom and virtual, but you're right, connecting with them can, if it lasts too long, be very challenging. Carolyn, how about you? How has the pandemic changed the way your organization works?
So it's changed the way our organization works in many ways, and in some ways it's not changed it. So I'm in the here. You heard earlier. First of all, thanks so much for allowing me to be part of this panel. Very excited to be here and to talk to our IU community. With that said, I'm in the healthcare space, in the hearing healthcare space. So that means our business is very much a healthcare provider driven business. So, and that means it's an essential business. So when the pandemic struck, it was very important for us to do a number of different things, not unlike Tom has mentioned. And first off was ensuring the health and safety of all of our employees, fundamentally. So we certainly had to scramble to figure out how to make sure we could go to a remote setting as quickly as possible. It was a skill that we do have, but now you had to ramp it up to a whole new level, and that was key. At the same time, because we're an essential business, we needed to make sure that our operational structure was still intact, and that's global across plants everywhere, as well as some of our production in the U.S. And so it was a case of thinking about the essential operations that still needed to function, and how do we manage and keep those employees safe while not, or causing at least a minimal disruption to our ongoing business for our HCPs and also their patients. So that was something that we had to master very quickly, and ultimately is another lesson in crisis management, right? And so that was something that we had to really make sure we jumped on top of quickly. And then the other thing that I would say in terms of what's changed from a format standpoint, of course, is we had to become even greater masters at the technology that we already use from a global perspective, but be flexible to using various different sources, because internally we may use one source, externally different customers use different sources. So how could we quickly galvanize around making sure we had the right tools to be as effective as we could in the marketplace as well. So that was a key change for us. And those are probably the big three. And of course, there's many others.
Great. And Derek, you're also in the healthcare space. Have your changes been pretty similar to what Carolyn mentioned?
Yeah, they've been pretty similar. I think, a couple of things. One, consistent with Tom, we're operating very effectively on WebEx, Zoom, whatever platform, everyone uses, Microsoft Teams. I actually think it's enabled us to realize we can do it. I think there were some people who thought you had to be in the office, right? You had to be physically seen. And I think this environment has changed that. The other thing is people. I think there's always a concern with people, but I found this environment, checking on employees more frequently, checking on colleagues, asking how they're doing, making sure that they get mental breaks from work is something that has changed dramatically for me. I find I'm constantly checking on people, and if I get a sense that they're overworked, I'm, telling them unplug immediately, right? And then, similar to Carolyn, from a healthcare perspective, all of our industries were impacted by this, but, at the end of the day, we still have to supply product to patients. Trials actually pause in the pharmaceutical industry for a period of time, just because patients couldn't get to trial sites to be a participant in studies. So that's changed, but I would say the people is really a big piece, and just seeing that we can actually use technology in an effective way has really been the big change.
And it sounds like there's going to be ongoing issues that we're going to have to contend with in terms of morale and making sure everybody can remain upbeat the longer this carries forward. And that's just going to be very difficult for all of us, because we're asking a lot of folks, really. Tom, I'll switch back to you. You're a very global entity, and given the nature of the disruption, have you seen any change either in your company's ability or desire to remain a global entity? Is it harder to stay connected globally, or perhaps easier? Is it harder to maintain those relationships through this environment, or are you finding it easier? So just help us understand the global aspect and the impact that COVID has had.
So I have always been, and I remain, a deep believer in global connectivity and global companies and global operations. But I think it's going to be different, going forward. It's going to be more complicated, and the idea of, that has been, so among the traditional thinking of there's a more Western-oriented single way of thinking, and there might be a more Eastern-oriented way of thinking. That world is beyond us. I see it as a global world, but with a much more local elements, and the interactions between the local entities are much more complicated. The views on major issues, be that political, societal, racial, are very different, and the underlying value set is different, and it is not so easy it's actually impossible, to go through and to say, here's a dominant point of the world, or here's a dominant player in the world. I think that relativity, we also see has changed, and that is just the view on how things get executed and done. So it is a more complicated world. Do I think it's become harder to connect globally? No, actually, I find it quite easy. That is not the part. It comes a bit back to how you connect. I find I get to interact with my teams and my clients, or generally BCG's clients, more frequently than in other times. Before, I was always thinking, if I see my teams in person once a year, that was the cadence. And now it is, I'm seeing my teams once a month, but I see them virtually. So I don't see them over dinner. I don't hear everything personal, but I touch them, more frequently in that way. I don't personally see a difference between domestic connectivity and global connectivity in the business that we run. It is more about groups of communities that are in individual industries or in individual geographies, that make that work. It's that network that has to come together, and that is not a boundary, driven network at all. So I see it as that path, works, both ways, pretty well, from my perspective. The longer it goes, as you say, the more we'll be challenged, and there'll be different parts of the world that are challenged. I think the West Coast is challenged in a global company, and then you go all the way on the other side. Australia, Japan is challenged purely because the time zones, whenever you operate globally, I'm sure when you sit on your global boards and you think about what the time windows are, it tends to be 7 a.m. Eastern, and then whatever else everybody else fits in, that's 4 a.m. on the West Coast, and that's often very late in the further parts of Asia Pacific.
Yeah, but it sounds, Tom, like some of the lessons learned or some of the best advantages that have come out of this, you may actually keep some of those things. And the connectivity, for example, internationally on a more frequent basis using virtual means. Sounds like those may be a part of the ongoing plan that you have.
Absolutely. So some of the things that we didn't believe were doable, Derek, you mentioned that before, we believe now are doable. A more remote working, working with a client doesn't always mean, you have to see that person. I don't know how often I've been on a plane flying to whatever, Russia or the Middle East, because there was somebody, and it's just picking two countries, it could be Germany or Japan or whatever, because there was an important meeting and it was an hour, and you fly over and then you try and do some other things, leave alone the sustainability and carbon efforts that go with that. And it's a crazy world. I think we're going to do that less. I actually just, spoke just in a story side. I spoke to the CEO of Zoom just earlier today, did an interview with him. And he said his default has been and is the first meeting is a Zoom. And if we then have to meet in person, we'll meet in person. I could well imagine that will be a principle for our work as well.
I like that. I like that. Carolyn, let me switch questions here. I know that it can be frustrating to hear this expression, the new normal, but we are in a very different place worldwide now, 10 months into this. How are you preparing for the new normal when there is going to be tremendous uncertainty in the market? None of us knows what's around the corner. Do you think that being a global company is still going to be important, as important as it was pre-pandemic, and how are you preparing for that next new normal?
It's a great question, Heidi. And I will tell you that part of the lens I wear is fundamentally, we are a global society, right? And unfortunately, the pandemic in many ways has illustrated that for us in tragic ways in many cases. And from a business perspective, for me, it does not change at all. Our company, from a healthcare perspective, is headquartered in Europe. And we have, for my team, some of my teams in Europe, some are scattered across the rest of the US, et cetera. So we've been operating in a global mindset, pretty much, we do that every day. So in that regard, we'll continue to do that. We'll continue to try to optimize tools that allow us to function better in that regard. I would say that probably one of the things that's been more challenging, like Tim, we haven't had that much of a difference between global or domestic in terms of how we connect. And it's all been very positive in some ways, because now, given that we're mostly in virtual settings, we've had a chance to really see the human side of pretty much all of our employees. When we're doing so many meetings that are virtual, you now have in many ways, a better connectivity to people, because you recognize we're all struggling to juggle and navigate this whole remote setting. In that regard, it's helped us get even deeper and faster in many cases to decisions in meetings, because we kind of level set by everyone kind of talking about what's their challenge, and then we get into the business of work. So in that regard, positive. The things that I think are a challenge will be, or make us think differently about how we operate, would be similar to what Tom said. What do we need to do to optimize the workforce from flexibility and options for people? Because while the remote setting is great for many, for some it's not. And in some cases, being able to work at home is actually a negative. And so we try to think about how can we be flexible and sensitive to all the different needs so that all of our team employees, even our customers, our suppliers, are able to use whatever tool is most effective for them and be in whatever setting is most effective. So with that said, all of these things I think are going to be important as we go forward to figure out how do we optimize the way we work. I do believe it's causing us to reset on what needs to be brick and mortar versus what needs to be permanently a home setting. So from a financial perspective, as we think about how do we best operate our business to be able to optimize ability to invest, that becomes a bigger question for us as well, and what we have to think through as we go forward also. So those are just some of the things that are important for us to think about as a global company that will only and always continue to be very global and very connected to where our patients are. Those are the things we have to really continue to sort through.
Very interesting. It's interesting that you say in some instances you're actually making decisions faster, that this has actually sped it up. But I'm also struck by your comment that you're having to think about things differently. And I'm curious, clearly there could be different impacts for different audiences within your organization. So for example, women may be a bit more challenged from their time perspective. I was on a call yesterday with a group of women and they were talking about things probably that don't occur in calls with men, because they were talking about trying to balance the work life because they were working from home. Are you experiencing that too? Are you seeing that among your employees?
Absolutely. And that was part of the catalyst to make sure that we came up with flexible options that could work for all the various different personal settings that are, I mean, it's a diverse workforce. How can we have solutions that address that? And you're absolutely right. In some cases, whether it was a mother or a father, there's children at home, there's pets, there's extended family. In some cases, it's, as challenging as it is to say, sometimes it's even safer to be at work and more productive versus at home. So we had to consider all those different things. And we're definitely doing the best we can to come up with the best options.
Yeah, so greater adaptability, greater
adaptability, absolutely.
Each person, great.
Really critical. Mm-hmm.
So Derek, I'm going to switch questions again. In higher education, we're talking a lot about whether and how education has to change, and as a result of the pandemic. I'm curious, what advice do you give employees in the organization as to how they need to navigate in terms of new ways to stay engaged with global staff and partners? And are you finding that you're having to change the approach to training and development? And are there other kinds of support that you have to provide now that are new ways of supporting employees? So training and development and beyond.
Yeah, so it's a good question. A couple of answers to that, and I'm learning this. I think particularly as we see younger people come into the workforce. I think one, working remote, I think, takes stamina, right? It takes a certain amount of stamina to be on these calls all day, and it takes a certain amount of focus, right? Which I think you have to be a certain kind of person to do that. And fortunately, I've been blessed where I work with a lot of people who have that stamina, who have that focus, and are very reliable. I've worked with other people, surprisingly enough, who I think, and I think because they grew up in this culture where they just have access to multiple platforms and technology, they somehow think they can do 5 things at the same time, just because they're home and they can be on WebEx and do whatever else. So I think just making sure that people actually know to be in the moment, to be zen whenever they're in meetings, is kind of important for people to understand, because sometimes you feel like you're losing people in this world where they start doing other things. So I think, for certain people, again, I think they get it, and others they think they can do 5 things at the same time. When you start to see the work product, you realize they can't. But in terms of tools, and one of the things I think back to what Carolyn said is, both companies, my Pfizer and my new company, I think is trying to accommodate being able to work from home. So like our company, for example, has given us an allowance to be able to build, a work from home office. And, whether you need a second monitor, whether you need a chair, or whether you need a printer, I think, to Carolyn's point, being flexible in this environment when you're working from home, I think is something that, both Pfizer and Spark, where I work now, are definitely very willing to accommodate. So I think, working in organizations where you can give people the tools and training people to enable you to do that, I think is very important in this environment. So those are the 2 aspects I would hit when I think about just making sure, how do you train people in this environment? You got to really be zen in the moment. And then also just giving people the tools to make sure they can do the work when they're working remotely is really important.
Derek, as our students approach their jobs in the future, it looks like those are going to be potentially different. I'm wondering, are there things they can do now to prepare themselves for that different environment that they're going to go into based on what you just talked about? So you talked about, the ideas of tools and mastering them and trying to be in the moment when they're interacting on things like this. Are there preparations that we can provide to our students now to get them ready for that environment?
Yeah, I mean, I think and it's funny, my son, someone told him about this, is really being Zen, like how to be, when you do something, training that, just focus on that one, not necessarily focusing on the one thing, but again, being in the moment of what you're doing and being productive. So I think tools that train people that, yes, now we have computers, we have internet, we have phones, you have multiple things, but you still need to be Zen. So it's almost like training people how to be Zen and be in the moment whenever they're in meetings or whenever they're in conference calls. I see so many people, and I watch, they start doing other things in the middle of a conference call, and you call them and they're like, oh, can you repeat that again? I'm like, well, you weren't really listening. You weren't in the moment. So I think, I don't know the specific tools, but I think just teaching people that when you're in a call with clients, when you're in a call with the other side in negotiation, to really be in the moment is important. And I see technology sometimes gives people an excuse not to be in the moment. I know one of the things we've done at Pfizer is we actually force people to be on video, right? So turn your video on, don't turn it off if you're on a conference call, which I think also forces you to be in the moment. So things like that, I think, again, I don't know the exact tools, but how to get people to be in the moment when they're in meetings and when they're at work is critical, in my opinion.
I can think of 350 faculty members who are thanking you for that advice. They want to be in the moment. And it's always interesting how the students don't realize that when your eyes go downward, we know you're looking at your cell phone instead.
Yeah.
So thank you for that advice. We've got faculty who are appreciative. Tom, the pandemic, and in a way you've answered my next question, but let's sort of broaden it a little. The pandemic is all about reimagining work as we know it. What does the future of work look like? What does the future for consulting look like in your mind? And think far out and sort of give us that insight.
I think I'm not even sure it's a work in consulting. It might actually come a bit back to the conversation that you and Derek, were just having. I think that one of the very important changes is that the more silo or functional skills that we've been thinking about in such a long time are not going to carry the day. And I can give you a couple of examples. I mean, even if you look at what some of the major platform players, go Amazon, Facebook, go Alibaba on the other side of the world, etc. It's all cross industry. It's all cross functional. The friction points to open are across the board, are not necessarily in the silo. And that also means when you think about work, the ability to work in multidisciplinary teams and understand each other, have an openness for that, and think about that in what is a win-win proposition versus I grew up in this silo, and so therefore I'm a finance person, I'm a marketing person, and that is what has to dominate the worldview, is not going to be that way anymore. And then you can go outside, you think about multi-stakeholder parts between government institutions and corporate. I'd say actually what was very different in this pandemic, even back to the 2008, 2009 crisis, was a much higher degree of collaboration between some of the regulatory parts, some of the government parts, and some of the private institutions, whether that be healthcare related, liquidity related, and so on. So there is a big impediment in what successful work will be to create enormous impact. And that then translates, when we usually talk about future of work, we mean, are you going to work from home and are you going to work in the office? I'm not sure I've got a good answer for you, on that one. We really don't know that, so well. What we probably know is that, for certain work groups, it's much clearer that they can stay remote. I'm meaning more, transactional accounts payable type part, but that is by work classification. That is not necessarily by emotional engagement and mental stability that is independent of the workers. We also think that some of the innovation and creativity related parts of work will need a different approach, and not yet do we believe that this can totally be done virtually across the world. But that also depends on how some of the tooling evolves and how some of the setups evolve. I think there's a lot still to be learned. In that conversation, we're really only 6 months in, after 100 years of a different way, or say 30 years of a different way. I would not want to dare to speculate on drawing a line into the future yet. The experimentation is going to be there. The very important part about the multidisciplinary piece will override all of the location where the work is.
It's a very, very helpful answer. And if you'll pardon me for jumping in on this one. So it strikes me that it's not only the fact that it won't be siloed from the disciplines of business, but even beyond that. And I think, for example, we have a new Master of Science in Cybersecurity, but it's not taught strictly from a business perspective. We add in informatics and the technical perspective, and then we add in from the law school, the legal perspective. And so it's really stretching well beyond just business functional areas, going way outside and being multifaceted to bring those areas together to solve problems. And then the other thing that strikes me is that you're, in a sense, I think underlying your comment is that we're going to have to be continuously learning, because what you learned at one point in time in your educational experience is not going to serve you for years going forward because of the fluidity of what's going on. And you're just going to have to be in that constant mindset. It might be learning in smaller chunks, but learning nevertheless to maintain your currency, to maintain the recency of your information. Is that fair?
Both points are well taken, idea. Let me start with the second one first. We deeply believe that whether you call that education or skilling in some form, will be a much more relevant part. But I think we've got to get away from this language. Everything is lifelong learning and so on. I don't think that has hit really the mark of a communication for many people. It is, what are some of the new exposures? And cyber is a very good one that you're taking as a cross-cut view. You could take that for how do we think about climate and sustainability in various work processes? How do we think about digital and human interactions? There are some major shifts that are going on that I would try and ride on this. Also, as you think about your curriculum and agenda going forward, not everybody work with everybody. Yeah, that's helpful too. But if we could go to the really large shifts, I think it makes a big difference. And that gets to your first question around the multidisciplinarity. Absolutely, I would add to that one, which might be the theme of the international program, diversity of background in solving those problems. It is not just that the disciplines come together to solve cyber the way you described, but that people with different cultural backgrounds, different race backgrounds, different gender backgrounds come together. It is all about the creativity in the background of the problem solving that will make this better and will actually be able to solve some of the problems that we're dealing with and that we for so long have not made enough progress on.
Really good point. Really good point. Carolyn, I know we dwell a lot on the negatives vis-a-vis the pandemic. So maybe we need to shift and think about the positives that have emerged during the pandemic. What has happened in the last 6 months that has made business better for you? What are some of the good things, the good experiences that we can take away from this?
Sure. Well, there is a lot of bad, but there's also a lot of good. And so, at least in my experience and what I've learned in terms of some of the positive things that have come out of the past 8 months has been, one, we really, I think, got a master class in how, or at least developed a master class that we shared with our organization in how to stay engaged with our employees and staff and stakeholders in a way that's meaningful, given all the disruption happening around them. Because the piece of this whole equation is that there's a lot of uncertainty for a lot of individuals who may not necessarily be our exact employees, but those who are in their circle. So what we did is we tried to figure out how can we make sure we had constant communication that was meaningful in various different forms, so that our stakeholders always knew what was happening with the business. They always knew where they stood. And so in that regard, a certain level of added transparency, I think, was a positive. that's come out of all of this, because as we continue to engage with our employees, as we went through the various different types of work settings and locations, and also just how people did their work or not, we were very transparent about it. And as a result, we found that everyone stayed highly engaged, which also made our business almost seamless as it started to recover relative to the pandemic itself. So in that regard, really being better at employee engagement, which we do something called a pulse survey every year. And one of our challenge areas is sometimes employee engagement, right? And so the feedback that's been coming back from our organization and individuals has been very positive. So that's one very, very clear one. The other one is knowing that we can be very effective from a global perspective, almost seamlessly, really taught us that the things that we're doing are good and what we should keep doing. And then some of the things that we could be a little bit better at with respect to being flexible. This is kind of what I sparked to what Tom said a few minutes ago around being able to be sensitive to the various different ways that you communicate with various different cultures and do business with various different cultures. Something as simple as being able to rotate in that limited time zone that you have to have those global meetings that you need to. Start them at different times so that you're not, one country isn't always taking the hit. Right. And doing that more broadly. That's something that I've done for years, but having that more broadly understood around the organization, I think was a positive, right, for everyone involved. So sometimes it's very tangible and practical things that you just bring to the fore that are positive in this environment. So those are a couple of them. The other thing, again, I would go back to what I mentioned earlier too. Decision making has, at least I've noticed, has been a little bit easier because in many cases, some of these barriers have been broken down in terms of whether it's someone's reticence to make a decision or someone's concerned about what a leader may say has kind of lowered in level because now the leader's dog's barking in the background, right? And the CEO's, daughter is screaming in the other room. And so that humanizes leaders in a way that makes it easier for people to feel comfortable sharing their thoughts and decisions as well. That's been a huge positive as well. So those are just three things that I would highlight.
Thank you. I never thought of it that way, but when you're in someone's living room or in someone's kitchen, it changes the nature of the relationship. And that's, I was trying to figure out when you said before that decision-making has sort of sped up and maybe even a little bit easier in terms of getting voices in, where that was coming from, but that makes sense that you're
posturing
in people's homes now, and so you're experiencing their life at the way they do, and it humanizes them. That's a really good point. And thank you for the encouragement. We have not yet done our rendition of the Pulse survey for this year, and I was a little nervous over what it may reveal. So hopefully it'll reveal something positive because we have been able to connect with people more frequently. So maybe we'll benefit from that as well. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Derek, you just heard Carolyn talk about the added transparency, the higher levels of engagement, the global engagement, and this idea of even humanizing people, and maybe that helps with decision-making. It democratizes decision-making in some ways. What are some of the positive things that have come out of this experience for your organization?
Yeah, someone said something to me, and I think this is true. They said this pandemic has actually evened the playing field, right? So, think about it. It kind of goes back to the point earlier, if you're in a culture where, FaceTime, when you're in someone's office, if that is meaningful, this pandemic has taken that away, where now, whether you're in China, whether you're in South Carolina, wherever we're all using the same platform. We all kind of have to get in touch with each other in the same way, right? So the pandemic is actually, if you felt like you were at a disadvantage being out of headquarters, that's kind of gone away. So, for employees who are not in the hub, I think they now feel perhaps they're on the same level playing field as everyone else because, now the quote unquote advantage we may have had of being in an office is taken away. So that's one thing. The second, for me personally, I think this goes back to the point that Tom said, and I actually think he raised a really important point around being able to pull together the pieces of the puzzle. To his point, we don't want to operate in silos. And personally, for me, I think I've been successful because I'm able to problem solve, and problem solve includes just pulling different pieces of information that others can't think of to pull the pieces of the puzzle together. And what this pandemic has forced me to do is to make sure I'm reaching out more to make sure that I understand, those different pieces of the puzzle I understand, particularly now that I've just joined a new company. So like I find that I'm constantly on calls with people just saying, what do you do? Explain the org structure. Who does this and who does that? So that, seriously, whenever I'm in a negotiation or whenever something comes up, I can say, oh, I had this conversation with such and such on a WebEx. They told me this. I can pull that piece of information out of my toolbox and hopefully solve problems. So, when you're in an office, kind of just in your day-to-day doing things, it's kind of easy to not do that. I now am more rigorous in just making sure I can just spend time just pulling pieces of the puzzle together. And the last piece for me personally is I religiously try to just carve out time just to think. And what this pandemic can do sometimes is it'll just have you go back to back to back to back, meeting after meeting. And it's very easy to get caught in that cycle. I literally will block my calendar, like, do not bother me, do not schedule. So I can just step back and just think. And that was hard to do in the office, a little bit, because people would come in and ask me questions. It's a little bit easier now to do that as well too. So that for me has been a couple of good things.
That's a really good point. You really are a little bit more in control, if you will. Well, we've had at least one question that I see in the chat, so I'm going to pose this to you, Tom. The question is from Rabbi Beth Wing, and the question is, she's wondering about forging new connections. It may be easier to maintain existing connections during this environment and using the tools that we have, but what about forging new connections and forging new bonds? And I also am curious about this. I was actually on a board meeting this morning, and one of the things that came up in that discussion was business with existing clients was actually easy. We could connect easily. Trying to develop business with new clients without that direct connection seemed to be harder. Are you thinking that new connections are harder and you have to go through extra steps, or are you seeing something different, Tom?
I think it's a journey that we're going through in quite different phases already in this year. And so the picture I have in my mind is probably more my own experience, and what we get to see, around that is, in the first couple of months, March to June, I would call that the time of you only spoke to your best friends. And so, because everybody was in total disarray and nobody knew which way this was going, and everybody was heads over shoulders into very operational activities. I only spoke to my really closest client. Nobody, that was, and my closest friends. That's on the personal side as on the professional side. I found then that into the third quarter, it opened up more. It became a wider, circle. So, but it was still a trust element. There needed to be the next connection level, that you could spend, time with. Somebody knew of somebody, or small groups got together virtually, not so much in person, but virtually. Though I think we're getting into a next phase now, I find it now much easier to speak directly to people, even without introduction. And this whole oddity is gone. So I haven't met you first, we need to talk and whatever else. I think so most people approach it now with, okay, we know the world we live in. We know that usually it would have been different. So now we're speaking, and we speak with openness. And so this usual barrier that you have to get up is over. When I reflect on the whole year and translate that also where our business has been, I'd probably say, 3/4 of our business this year has been with existing clients, and a quarter has been with new clients, which is unusual. For a normal year, we would have a higher number of new client engagements than what we see. But basically, Robbie makes your point in the chat that it's been easier with relationships today. But I really feel it's opening. I think the entry level to go out and speak to people has become much lower, and people are also looking for new inspiration because they've had the same conversations in some way for the last couple of months. So it's getting easier, but your observation is absolutely right.
Very interesting. By the way, I remember when it first hit, I was hearing not just from old friends, but but friends I hadn't talked to in years. I think everyone thought the world was ending. And so we were getting all of these phone calls of people you hadn't talked to in years. I want to make sure you're well and healthy. Now all of that stopped. I don't hear from them anymore. So we've at least figured out this is going to be an ongoing sort of situation that we're in. You did surprise me a little bit by telling me, I would have thought that about 3/4 of your client base would have been repeat or return clients on a regular basis. So that's interesting. It sounds like that's different than what you would have normally experienced in terms of previous years.
I'd say it's probably more a 60-40 part, and the reason is we are a fast-growing company. I mean, like, we're not a fast-growing tech company, but in comparison, but think about it as more a 15 to 20% growth company all along. And so you add a lot of new clients, every year, into the mix. So the balance is shifted, that way. But it is less, though it is increasing. If I was to do it quarter by quarter, I would have said the second quarter is 90% existing or 95% existing clients, and now it's starting to get more open, more balanced again.
Okay, very good. Thank you. I do want to invite people to ask questions. We have another question, and Carolyn, I'll shift this your way. It says, it's a question about what lies ahead in terms of globalization and content sharing, but let me get to the specific part of the back end of the question. How does one balance the need for individual privacy with the need for meaningful data sharing, whether in healthcare / HIPAA or just online transactions at the computing edge? So is this the question of balancing privacy, individual privacy in this current environment?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I will tell you, there's probably exhaustive ways to think about answering that question. And I would probably start with, I think it's a bit of a moving target, right? There's people are very creative in ways to try to break down information from a privacy standpoint. So at least in my experience in what we do, and actually I've gotten quite a bit of experience with this, because to Tom's point earlier, you start to wear a lot of different hats depending on what's happening with your organization. And we've had some things that have required me to get even more involved from a privacy standpoint. So fundamentally, internally, we certainly have protocols that we put in place from a regulatory perspective, i.e. we have to, and then also from a legal perspective, because we want to make sure that we protect ourselves, our employees, our clients, everyone that we do business with. So there's a whole regulatory environment that we have to make sure that we take care of from a privacy standpoint, and of course HIPAA without question. And then two, we have a very, very talented IT organization who's constantly staying abreast of, along with our compliance organization and legal, of what is the latest thinking with respect to new rules and regulations. And we have to do that on a global basis. So whether it's the European agencies or agencies in Asia, staying on top of what's coming is important for us. We do a lot of compliance training as a result of that. We do a lot of changing to our systems, a lot of new safety protocols in place. We do a lot of work in terms of ongoing training for our employees, in terms of ongoing learning and compliance exercises and certifications that they have to get, so that they understand data privacy from an individual employee perspective. And that applies for those who are then working remotely as well, right? And so what are those remote rules that are over and above the technology and cybersecurity rules that we put in place? So everything from learning and training to making sure we're adhering to the regulatory requirements and staying ahead of anything new that's coming down the pike, we have to do. We also make sure we stay ahead of any type of new changes with respect to audits and regulatory situations that arise as audit firms and audit rules change. So it's a constant cycle to make sure that we stay on top of this piece, both individually for our employees and as an organization. So there's quite a bit that we do.
Got it. And Derek, from a similar industry, basically the same, would you describe it the same way that Carolyn did in terms of dealing with the issues that are emerging today?
Yeah, no, it's very similar. As a matter of fact, when we negotiate these contracts with companies, for like at least the last 10 years, there have been a lot of laws and contracts, specifically if you look at Europe, right? Europe has already instilled a lot around data privacy. So because we, obviously share data globally, you have to, respect what's being done in Europe. So Europe actually has a very, very, very high bar relative to the United States for data privacy and ensuring, that information that shouldn't be shared is not shared. And I know, at least in my old company and even now at Spark, we go through tons of training on not sharing information and data privacy. It's something that's taken very seriously. So this is consistent with Carolyn.
Got it. Tom, we have one last question. I think we might have time, a couple minutes for one last question. And this question was submitted, and it says, it's someone who had served in a consulting capacity before and said, when a consultant, people, process, and technology, being able to analyze that, a lot depended on seeing clients interact, seeing them in their home environment, seeing them interact with each other. You can't really do that even in a structured Zoom kind of setting. That's gone. So are you missing something by not being able to see clients up close and personal in their settings?
It's a great question. That's an important part, and comes to my point early on that we used working to work shoulder by shoulder with our clients. Our teams that are working, particularly in the manufacturing world, where a lot of that is happening, become quite innovative. And so we have either single team members that walk through with cameras, or we actually have a lot of employees that are wearing either cameras or virtual reality devices in a way that we can track that when we can't get access to the facilities. So again, it is about being innovative. We're doing a major piece with a big processing plant that I'm quite involved in. It is all remote work, and it is all camera based on the side. And then the teams get together, we run it in agile process, and multidisciplinary teams still get together in the break times or outside to make that work. So it's all the creativity of innovation. When you want to solve the problem and you put just engage teams on that want to solve the problem, they figure out how to do it. So you're totally right, but I think that is part of our next world too. Very clever
response, very clever approach. Well, I know that they're ready for the breakout teams now, so let me offer my sincere thanks. Tom, Derek, Carolyn, thank you so much. This was amazing, and we really, we benefit so much from your insight. So thank you for helping with this initiative.